Well, meanwhile, the head of the Syrian Negotiations Commission, Nasser al-Hariri, has held a press conference here in Istanbul. And in his press conference, he criticized a meeting organized by Saudi Arabia for independent representatives for the Syrian opposition. Let's get more. Cross over to our Turkey analyst, Yusuf Edim, who was at that meeting. Yusuf, before we get into what he said about the Syrian opposition meeting in Riyadh, let's start off with what al-Hariri said about the situation in Idlib province, which is, as we've been reporting, quickly turning into a new crisis.
He was very, very concerned about the situation in Idlib. He talked about the 220,000 people who have been displaced. He talked about the harsh weather conditions that they're facing. He also said that these regime attacks were specifically targeting the infrastructure and that this offensive was impacting over 3 million people in the area that could quite possibly become further displaced as well. He also lashed out at the international community, saying they failed to protect civilians and that a complete ceasefire is needed as soon as possible. He stated that the regime is not abiding by the terms of the Sochi agreement and that they're only attacking civilians and not terrorists as they claim. He also stated that the whole HTS scenario, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham terror group that the regime claims to be targeting, that was basically just a cover for these operations against civilians, and that there is no international pressure on Assad to implement or abide by the Sochi deal as well. So he was very, very concerned over what's happening in Idlib. It was a major part, but not all of his press conference. Now, in the second half of his press conference, Nasser al-Hariri also talked about the meeting in Riyadh. That was another part of concern. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Because this meeting was held without any legal justification, without having enough time for planning and preparation to choose the independent participants, we in the Syrian Negotiations Commission have nothing to do with it, and we won't accept its outcomes given the conditions that we are experiencing right now.
So he talked about the large-scale devastation that's happening in Idlib province. What role can Turkey play in this regard?
Turkey has already played an important role since 2016, 2017 with the formation of the Astana process. And we also know that the 2018 Sochi agreement, the memorandum of understanding signed between Russia, Iran, and Turkey representing the guarantor of the opposition, and Russia and Iran, the guarantor of the regime, which called for a ceasefire in Idlib. And while it was implemented for a certain amount of period, it seems that that ceasefire has collapsed in recent months with renewed regime attacks. Now, one of the things that Turkey can do is push Russia and pressure Russia to also exert pressure on the regime to stop these attacks. We know that much of these attacks, the firepower used, are Russian warplanes bombing the area, which are supporting the regime. So there's a very important meeting coming up January 8th between the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. And this could quite possibly be a perfect occasion for the two of them to sit down and broker a renewed ceasefire, something maybe more permanent. And when I was here, I asked some of the individuals, what are their expectations from the Syrian opposition? What are their expectations of the Putin-Erdogan meeting? And they told me that we don't have expectations, we only have hopes, and our hope is for a ceasefire.
Okay, all right. Our Turkey analyst, Yusuf Edim, live for us from Istanbul. Thank you for that.